Is it time for United Ireland? Joining me today is Matt Carthy, Sinn Féin MEP from the Republic of Ireland. Matt, it's a nice idea, but how are you going to pay for this?
Well, the truth of the matter is, and I would challenge any independent economist to argue that the current situation is sustainable. So you're right, in the past a lot of people have talked about can we afford a united Ireland. I think the conversation has moved dramatically now towards a stage where people are asking can we continue to afford partition, because you have to remember we're a very small island on the edge of Europe, about 6.5 million people. We have two of everything. We have two health services, we have two transport systems, we have two education systems, we have two economic development agencies that aren't only operating back to back, but in many instances are actually competing against each other. So to me, economically, the argument has now shifted to an entirely different place, reinforced, I think, by the prospect of the North being dragged out of the EU against our own democratically expressed wish by the British government's Brexit strategy.
I come from Belfast, so having lived there and knowing both sides of the tribal divide, it's not as easy as the economics. How do you persuade the unionist population, those who are maybe even more radical, to participate even in the process, never mind consider the idea?
Yeah, and that's a big question, because I think you're right. The economic argument, as I would see it, has been won. It doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of additional work to do. But what I want to see happen, what Sinn Féin are currently engaged in, is a national debate where people from all sections of the community come together and thrash out what it is a united Ireland will look like, and then people will vote on that basis when a united Ireland poll takes place. Now, we're not naive enough to think that people who currently vote for the hardline DUP, for example, are going to vote yes in a referendum on the united Ireland.
Will they not change their mind?
I don't think so, because I think in fairness this is more than money. So they're not going to come to a point and vote in favour of united Ireland. What our responsibility is to convince them that even if the vote goes a different way than they would like, that their identity, their culture and their place in society will be respected and treasured in a united Ireland scenario. Well, I think a lot of that is down to setting out the parameters as to what a united Ireland will look like, what the constitutional and political framework will be in place. So in our discussion document that we released last year, we envisage a scenario where perhaps you could see the Stormont Executive and Assembly, assuming we get it up and running in the short term, remaining in place in a post-United Ireland scenario. And the difference will be that they will continue to have some of the devolved powers that they currently have, but rather than working under a Westminster government that clearly doesn't give a damn about any part of Ireland, north or south, they'll be working under a Dublin government that will have a vested interest in seeing the north succeed economically, politically and socially.
But the unionists would still want some participation from the British government. Would that be acceptable to Sinn Féin?
I think we're open to all options, because at this stage we're in, as I say, a national conversation. Now, unfortunately, a lot of unionists haven't engaged to the level that we would like, and particularly political unionism hasn't engaged. But certainly we're open to all options, and one of the things that we've set out very clearly is that we would envisage that those people who consider themselves to be British, for example, will continue to be entitled to British citizen in a United Ireland scenario. And there are measures like that we can put in place, safeguards to protect the unionist and British identity in the north of Ireland, while ensuring that the entire island can actually move forward. Because to me, the partition of Ireland has been an absolute disaster. It's been a particular disaster for the north, but I would argue for the entire island. And if we as a country and as a people want to reach our full potential, then we have to move forward together, because as a united Ireland, I believe we will be the best that we can be. We will be able to deliver internationally and domestically for our people.
It's one thing to argue that this is good for Northern Ireland. How do you persuade the Republic of Ireland that this is in their interest to absorb the transitional costs, the integration, and probably a huge economic burden for 25 years at least?
Well, every single opinion poll that has been carried out in the South has shown an overwhelming majority in favour of a united Ireland. Again, I think there will be arguments around the premise, because I don't believe that there will be a huge economic cost for reunification. In fact, I would argue that there will be an economic windfall, that there will be, it makes sense on a whole range of issues. But every independent economist that has looked at this scenario has argued that there would be a boost to the economic development of our country, north and south, in the scenario of united Ireland.
Is Sinn Féin the only party that wants to see united Ireland?
No, every political party, with the exception of the unionist parties, say they want to see united Ireland. So the government party Fine Gael, the opposition or government party, Fianna Fáil, depending on what day of the week it is, the Labour Party, the SDLP in the north, all these parties
How
have
do
as a
they
premise,
propose to fund it?
Well, the difficulty with all of them is that while they say they want to see United Ireland, they haven't been forthcoming and actually engaging with us.
Why is that?
And because I think in many cases they're conservative parties, so the status quo to an extent suits them. But it's clear that their own membership and their own supporters want to see moves towards unity. And what we've been challenging them to do is come together with us and let's set out the parameters as to what a united Ireland will look like. Because there's lots of areas on political or economic issues that we can have huge fundamental, in some cases ideological, profound disagreements with. But on this area, we all apparently agree that we want to see United Ireland. So what I've been saying to those parties and the challenge that we've been laying down for them, let's work together in the knowledge that it's only by doing so that we can actually achieve what we set out as an objective.
An Irish MEP here in this house that United Ireland really, this is the moment. It may not happen tomorrow, but certainly it's on that road. And during my lifetime, this is the first time I could say that's more than likely to happen. And he just said, 11 billion euros. Where are you going to find that from?
Well, first of all, as I say, it's not 11 billion euros, and that's been a figure that has
but
been...
But it's going to be more. Brexit's going to increase the damage done to Northern Ireland's economy.
Well, and then the answer is move towards unification quicker so that we can minimise that damage. But again, the 11 billion euro in terms of the subvention rate, it doesn't take into account that somewhere in the region of 3 billion of that is actually the contribution that the British government attribute to the North to pay for the British royal family or the British armed forces. So effectively, part of that money is paying for British occupations in Afghanistan and countries like that. So they clearly wouldn't be in place. Another element of that funding is actually included in the British Exchequer's maintenance in terms of the civil service, so what they would call UK-wide provision of services. They would just be passed over to a central, whether it be Dublin or Belfast administration, so there wouldn't actually be additional costs involved.
Still a big hole in your pocket.
And what we're forgetting is that under every, as I say, independent economist analysis of this, there is going to be a huge economic boost. And Kurt Hubner, who carried out a study of modelling the economics of reunification, predicted that somewhere in the region of 36 billion euro would actually be added to Irish GDP, north and south, within an 8-year period. So to me, there's an economic incentive rather than any economic cost to Irish unification.
Chancellor Cole had his memorial ceremony here in this building just a few days ago. He achieved what most people thought would be near impossible. Germany did pretty well after that as well, after reunification, but it required an international effort. Do you see an international effort to support politically and then finance a united Ireland? Absolutely.
I think the British government won't be able to just simply wash its hands on the day after unification. There will be a need for a contribution for them. Well, Kevin Maher, who's a former advisor to former British Secretary of State, wrote an interesting book on Irish unification, and he outlined that if, for example, the British government continued to pay its subvention at a reduced rate on an annual basis over a period of maybe a decade, that would be actually good value for money for the British taxpayer who he's representing. So there will be an obligation, I think, morally, politically and economically on the part of the British government. I think also there's going to be a central role for the EU, and you mentioned German reunification. The EU has as a central policy of, a support for the reunification of Cyprus, for example. Now, up until this point, the EU has always had a neutral position in relation to the north of Ireland, primarily because it involved 2 member states and a dispute. So you had an Irish government that had a position of pro-reunification, and you obviously had a British government with the opposite view. Post-Brexit, there won't be 2 member states with positions. There will be 1 member state with a position. That will be the Irish government's position in favour of reunification. So I absolutely can see the EU playing a positive role in terms of not only in terms of financial support, but also in terms of diplomatic and structural support for the reunification of our country.
Let's say they're going to continue with the peace money in some form or other, which the peace funding, which was effectively a bribery scheme to stop people fighting for so long, and it's worked to this point at least. How do you stop the violence from a radical group of loyalists who will never accept United Ireland?
Well, I think in terms of the premise in relation to the peace funding, I think the peace funding was put in place to meet what was a very clear infrastructural and societal deficit that had been in place as a result of decades of conflict and almost a century of partition. In relation to persuading people, I acknowledge that there's a big job of work to be done, but in the
Is
same...
the unionist leadership there to do that? Do they have the same grasp on the community that they would have had 15 years ago?
I think a lot of people in the unionist community are very pragmatic. They will see that when we have a situation where the majority of people in the north and a number of that section of people who will vote for a united Ireland come from what is now called the unionist tradition. I think people are open to persuasion in a post-Brexit scenario, and it'll be the responsibility of all of us to put in place the framework where, as I say, we protect and enhance the cultural identity and the British sense of identity among that cohort of the unionist community, and that we put in place safeguards, because make no mistake about it, partition hasn't served the unionist community. The successive British governments, and particularly Tory governments, have actually implemented policies that have been to the detriment of unionist communities, and I suppose it'll be up to us in that scenario to set out a programme for government that will actually ensure that the entire island of Ireland can actually move forward politically, socially and economically.
Let's say you get it on the table that there's a way forward economically. You have some sort of constitutional arrangement which looks fair. If it's not accepted, let's see. Timeline, how quickly does this happen?
In my view, I think within 10 years' time, we will be looking at a united Ireland in the same way as we're looking at Brexit. In other words, it will be an inevitability. Whether or not the vote has taken place, I'm not sure. I hope it has, but I think it will be accepted by all the players. What I hope will happen between now and then is that we have actually done the groundwork, so we're not in the situation where we are with Brexit, where nobody knows what it's going to look like. I want us to be in a position in 10 years' time that we know exactly what a united Ireland is going to look like. We know what we need to do in terms of ensuring that all the transitional arrangements can be put in place very quickly and very effectively, and that we can actually start moving together as a country, because, as I say, we're a very small island country at the edge of Europe. We're too small of a place to be divided and to be partitioned.
Matt Carthy, thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian.